Welcome back to the program, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. If you're new, please subscribe to World Affairs in Context podcast on Substack or Patreon for more and exclusive content. Just follow the links in the video description below to get connected. I would absolutely love to see you there. Something very strange is happening behind the scenes of the Ukraine conflict negotiations. Bloomberg just published a quite shocking article alleging that, according to a high-level Kremlin memo that was reviewed by Bloomberg, Russia is floating a stunning proposal to the Trump administration, not just peace talks, not just sanctions relief, but a full-scale economic reset that would include Russia returning to the US dollar system. Now, it would be extremely naive to return to relying on the US-led financial framework. Of course it would be. And Russia might entertain an idea of a limited arrangement where first, U.S. sanctions would need to be lifted for Russian banks to be once again incorporated into the SWIFT system, and then a limited in scope volume of financial transactions would be conducted in U.S. dollars. Why not? Now, the big question is, does this mean that Russia is ready to scrap, to turn away from its plans to promote currency multipolarity? Absolutely not, and I will explain why. The Global South has made de-dollarization a central pillar of its strategy to regain economic sovereignty. And in recent years, Moscow accelerated efforts to move trade into yuan, rupees, and alternative settlement systems. It was only after Washington weaponized the dollar that Russia made a decision to break free from U.S. financial dominance. What's more, the United States would benefit from Russia returning to the US dollar framework as a way to weaken Russia's ties with China. Settlements between Russia and China in Chinese renminbi have skyrocketed since 2022. So for Washington, it would be a win. And that is precisely why Washington is seeking to incorporate the idea of Russia sort of returning to the old ways. Now, for Moscow, this would also be a wise step because it needs to diversify to strengthen its position. It doesn't mean that it's going to rely on the US dollar. No, this is going to be a new framework that would still rely very much on diversifying currency transactions and diversifying currency reliance. Now, for Beijing, this would of course be a very unwelcome development because Beijing is indeed seeking to strengthen the position of its currency globally. Now, in a dramatic reversal, the Kremlin appears to entertain the idea of changing course somewhat. And why would that be? Because this isn't just about currency, of course. This is about leverage, and it is about geopolitics. The memo outlines 7 areas where American and Russian economic interests could converge if a peace deal is struck in NATO's proxy war on Russia via Ukraine first, that is. First, aviation. The proposal envisions long-term contracts to modernize Russian fleet, potentially with U.S. participation in manufacturing. Now, clearly, this would relate to civilian aircrafts only, and it would be rather limited in scope and time-wise. Second, joint oil and LNG ventures, including offshore drilling and hard-to-recover reserves. And here's the kicker. The memo suggests American firms could recover past losses from investments that are frozen after sanctions. And this is a direct appeal to U.S. corporate interests, which President Trump is likely to appreciate quite a lot. Now, the third area of proposed cooperation is preferential treatment for U.S. companies returning to the Russian consumer market. So after Western brands exited Russian market, the door could reopen, but this time under special conditions. Last year, President Putin did say that domestic producers will be prioritized in any circumstances, and those foreign ones that choose to come back shouldn't count on occupying the same spots that they chose to leave back in 2022. So domestic policies toward foreign companies are being readjusted, and Russia is prioritizing domestic producers, but it is also willing to reopen its doors to foreign investments and to foreign companies that wish to take up a share of Russian market. Now, the fourth area of cooperation is cooperation in nuclear energy, even extending to AI-related ventures. This is strategic technology territory. This is very, very interesting in my opinion, and this would be something that I would hope to get more information on, but as you all can understand, we don't really have the details. So let's move on to the next point. Point number 5, and this is the earthquake here, is Russia's return to the dollar settlement system, potentially even for energy transactions. Think about what that means. Energy priced and settled in dollars is one of the foundation of U.S. financial power. So naturally, Washington would benefit immensely from strengthening the U.S. dollar, from returning Russia to the U.S. dollar denominated framework. If Russian oil and gas re-enter dollar markets, it might be a symbolic and structural victory for Washington, and clearly President Trump would not hesitate to claim a victory here. It would also mean Russia once again operating within a system that the United States ultimately controls. And if that happens, I would expect there to be very clearly defined limits. And needless to say, Russia is unlikely to change its aim to diversify financial frameworks and to maintain its economic sovereignty. Now, the last position is number 6, and it is cooperation on critical raw materials such as lithium, copper, nickel, and platinum. These are the building blocks of electric vehicles, of semiconductors, and military hardware. Whoever controls supply chains controls the future. And last but not least, number 7, perhaps the most ideologically charged point, this is a joint push to champion fossil fuel over what the memo calls climate-friendly ideology favored by Europe and China. And so that line is not accidental. It reads like it was written specifically to appeal to Trump's political instincts, such as skepticism of green energy mandates, hostility toward wind power, and a focus on traditional energy dominance. As you know, Trump's donor network is very heavily concentrated in fossil fuel industries, so none of this is a surprise. The big question is, why would Russia consider returning to the US dollar even in a new, let's assume limited in scope format? That is the big question. Well, sanctions relief plus dollar access would definitely stabilize Russia's foreign exchange markets. It would reduce volatility, and it would also expand liquidity. The memo argues exactly that the dollar settlement would strengthen Russia's balance of payments while at the same time reinforcing the dollar's global reserve status. So in other words, this would be a win-win, and it is presented as a win-win. If Russia moves back toward the dollar system, it would weaken Beijing's long-term ambition to challenge U.S. financial dominance. And it would also hand Washington a geopolitical prize, which is splitting Moscow from Beijing. However, with that being said, I don't believe that transacting in U.S. dollars can actually split China and Russia in terms of their strategic plans. Neither China nor Russia trust the West, and both countries approach any partnerships with the West, with the United States and its Western allies. They both approach these partnerships in a very pragmatic manner. We've seen this over and over before. So I don't think that the position of Russia here is a naive one. Now, at the same time, from a purely financial perspective, bringing Russia back into the dollar system strengthens the role of the US dollar. It reinforces US financial centrality at a time when BRICS nations are openly discussing alternatives. So I would say that the United States needs this more than Russia does, and Moscow is fully aware of it. However, both countries would benefit from reintegrating Russia into the SWIFT system, although I would argue that a return to what we once had is very, very clearly not on the table. We cannot reverse the course, and it would be completely impossible. Washington has done more than any other country on earth to weaken its biggest asset, the US dollar, by turning it into a weapon. And it is unlikely that Russia, China, or any other country will forget that. Thank you very much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this quick update. Please support my work if you can. Become a paid subscriber on YouTube, Substack, or Patreon. Thank you so much to every single one of you who has already done that. I appreciate you. Thank you so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you here tomorrow. Take care.